listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. Sasha Barbagat with you. Reality TV is no stranger to controversy, but a recent moment on Married at First Sight has, for many, crossed a line. It's got people asking, should the punching of a wall by a participant in a fight be enough for one of the country's most popular TV shows to be pulled off the air?
It's so damaging because it's just normalised it and shown that, you can go and do whatever you want and you can still be on Australia's biggest national television show. It's pretty disgusting.
That conversation coming up in the second half of this episode. But first, it's time for the headlines with Helen Smith on Wednesday, the 5th of March.
Morning, Sasha. Morning, everyone. Tropical cyclone Alfred is continuing to track towards land, forcing a cancellation of a number of major events, including the AFL season opener. The storm, which is currently a Category 2 system, is due to make landfall on Thursday night or Friday morning. The league made the call yesterday to postpone the season's opening clash between the Lions and the Cats, which was due to happen at the Gabba on Thursday evening. And the Sun's scheduled home fixture against the Bombers at People First Stadium on the Gold Coast has also been postponed.
The NRL too has made the call to move the Dolphins v Rabbitohs game on Friday night from Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane to Sydney. Music fans have also been impacted by Alfred, with Green Day having to cancel tonight's show on the Gold Coast. Now, the storm's warning zone has been expanded by the Bureau of Meteorology. It's now predicted to impact between Brisbane in the north and as far south as Grafton in northern New South Wales. Alfred is expected to make landfall, though, in southeastern Queensland, with residents there spending yesterday preparing sandbags and their homes for storm surges, destructive winds and heavy rain.
The Prime Minister, meantime, has flown into Queensland overnight, where he'll meet with the Premier, but he's brushed off speculation about the election timing. Anthony Albanese has reportedly been planning to announce the date of the poll this weekend, but will likely hold off in the event the cyclone inflicts widespread damage. The federal government has activated the Australian Government Disaster Response Plan, a crisis coordination team, deployed liaison officers and are undertaking crisis appreciation and strategic planning.
Yeah, and that includes notifying the Defence Force, which are on standby. Hopefully, it's a Category 2. It's going to be a serious storm, a serious weather event, but hopefully destruction will be kept to a fair minimum. But we'll have to wait and see. It's weather. It's bloody unpredictable. So thinking of everyone who is in the pathway. And a reminder, if you are in the impact zone, you can get all the latest info. The ABC Emergency online site is the best place to go for collated information. And you can also tune into your local ABC radio station if you are in one of those impact areas. Now, I just also want to quickly remind everyone, cast your mind back a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about a story about the Bureau of Meteorology deciding to axe a name that was on the tropical cyclone list. So you might remember it goes through in alphabetical order. So just recently we had tropical cyclone Zelia in WA. Now, that was the end of the line. We were moving up to the next name in the alphabetical list, and it was supposed to be Anthony. But the bomb was like, we're going to skip Anthony because it just happens to be the Prime Minister's name as well. So at the time, Cyclone Alfred wasn't a thing, and now it is. So there you go. This should have been called Anthony.
I would love to see that list, and I wonder if Helen's on there or Sasha.
I'm sure Helen is.
In a significant backdown, Volodymyr Zelensky has called his disastrous White House meeting with Donald Trump and JD Vance regrettable. And he says he's ready to work with the president to get a peace that lasts. It comes after Trump announced he was pausing all aid to Ukraine, with the US being a major military and aid donor since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. The US Department of Defense has provided a figure of around $182 billion. That's around 290 billion Australian.
Yeah, the Ukrainian president went on in this statement that he posted to social media to say that he was ready to sign a minerals and security agreement with the US. Now, you might remember that's what he was there to do last week or over the weekend when he was meeting with Trump and JD Vance. That's what was supposed to happen. It didn't go ahead. He said he values what America has done to help maintain Ukraine's sovereignty and independence as well. And look, that meeting over the weekend between Zelensky, Trump and Vance to discuss the peace deal and the minerals deal did go viral, with that now infamous heated exchange between the three, but really it was Trump and Vance ganging up on Zelensky, who I thought maintained quite stark professionalism in the face of open hostility. But in Zelensky's latest statement, he said it is time to make things right and he would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive. It does feel like he's been forced into this position because, as you said, Helen, the amount of aid and military aid that the US provides to Ukraine is astronomical. We know that the US has been one of the biggest backers of Ukraine, especially since, not to mention that they're already allies pre the invasion of Russia. That has just ramped everything up. And of course, Western leaders, especially in Europe, are going to be watching this very closely because they've been holding their own summits going, okay, well, we're going to have to cover this shortfall. We don't want Russia marching through Europe and taking territory where it wants. So they'll be hoping that maybe this is a move in the right direction to that lasting peace that Zelensky talks about. But the ball is now in the White House's court. What is Trump going to say? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and Trump did claim that he could end this war in one day during his presidential campaign, which, it hasn't happened. And he's also been rekindling diplomatic relations with Moscow. A 16-year-old has been arrested in Western Australia after commenting on a newly opened Sydney Mosque's Instagram page with threats of committing a terrorist attack. The comment included the line, "I'm going to Christchurch 2.0 this joint," which is in reference to the 2019 mass shootings at a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, which claimed 51 lives. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns says a full police investigation is underway and that racist threats and Islamophobia will not be tolerated. And it comes as Muslims across the country are participating in Ramadan this month. The 16-year-old remains in custody, but no charges have been laid as of yet.
And we've heard from those two astronauts stranded on the International Space Station who have held a press conference in space this morning. Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams left on an 8-day Boeing mission to the ISS in June last year, but they were unable to return home with their capsule and they remain there to this day. Answering questions from the media overnight, the pair talked about the biggest challenge they've faced while stranded.
The hardest part is, having the folks on the ground have to not know exactly when we're coming back. Know, of course, that we are coming back with Crew 9, but all of that uncertainty, I think, is probably the most difficult part, and it takes a little time just to have that conversation with them on a daily basis and say, hey, we're coming back before long, so don't make all those plans without me. We'll be back before too long.
Now, she's being very diplomatic there. Neither have ever expressed anger or resentment at their plight, and they've maintained that they always planned to stay longer, even though the mission was only supposed to be a quick one. I get it. When you're flying into space and everything is experimental, you would have to have contingency plans. But this is months and months and months and months. And look, a return flight has been scheduled. That is supposed to happen sometime this month, Helen. No firm date has been set, but we know it won't be before the 12th, they said in this press conference. Now, I did have a look to see Butch does have kids. He's got 2 teenage daughters who can probably understand fairly well what's going on. They'd be scared, I'm sure. I think one's 16, the other's 19. But at least they can kind of comprehend what's going on. Now, Sunny, she doesn't have kids, but she has the next best thing, which is a dog, a Jack Russell named Gorby. And I went away for the weekend. I left my dog with my husband at home. And Shane, my husband, said, oh, he's lying by the door waiting for you to come home. And he waited that whole weekend. He just kept going to the door waiting for me. And I'm like, imagine if I was stranded somewhere for 8 months, not being able to explain to your dog, I'm coming home. She would be missing that dog so much. So their strength and resilience is admirable. I'm very impressed by the pair. So yeah, hopefully they'll be back on Earth sometime this month.
Well, apparently dogs have no real reference of time.
That's true.
I think, look, as sad as the doggy would be, I think it'll be okay. But man, I would be pretty pissed if I'm stuck in space for that long.
Helen, thank you so much. Next up, we're getting into your deep dive, looking into a petition that's been started around MAFS, and we'll tell you why it could change reality TV forever.
Before we get into this ep, it does discuss family, sexual and domestic violence. So if that's not for you today, feel free to join us in the next episode. And remember, you can always call 1-800-RESPECT if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic or family violence. MAFS is our biggest reality TV show in Australia, and a recent incident that aired last week is currently under investigation by police, where a groom allegedly punched a wall. The show has also been reported to SafeWork New South Wales. The episode's garnered a lot of attention online, and advocates against domestic, family and sexual violence are calling for Nine and the production company to take action. A petition has been set up by WYWWA, and it's calling for MAFS to take more responsibility to uphold the highest ethical standards regarding domestic, family and sexual violence, and as a show about relationships, take the opportunity to use it as education. Sarah Williams is the founder of What Were You Wearing and is a leading survivor advocate for domestic and sexual violence. Sarah, what did MAFS show and how did they address the behaviour?
Yeah, so as we saw and we have seen this season and also many other seasons, there has been, unacceptable behaviours going through on national television. For example, last week we saw one of the contestants, Paul, did get quite upset because of his partner Karina's sexual past, and it did lead to him punching a hole in the door. And what we saw, unfortunately, was that although MAFS at the commitment ceremony did hold him to account on the couch, they didn't immediately kick him off the show. They let him stay on the show. That honestly was very, very disappointing.
What is wrong with this picture that we're seeing?
I've been watching a few of the seasons for a while now, and I actually had been in contact with a few of the past participants from the show over the years, and I've heard the lack of support and the lack of things put in place to actually make sure the participants are kept safe, but also it goes further than that, ensuring that the viewers are safe as well. So keeping someone like Paul on Married at First Sight after the abusive behaviour, it's not just irresponsible, but it actively enables and normalises that type of behaviour. And we've seen reality TV, not just MAFS, but for so long has fostered toxic environments for entertainment. The issue is when these environments excuse or platform abusive behaviours, they become complicit in that harm. And to further on that, what that does is it sends a clear message that abusive behaviour isn't a deal breaker, and it should be a deal breaker. If someone is going to do some sort of act, it should be a deal breaker. They should be immediately kicked off the show. Not saying they shouldn't be given support. In my opinion, these contestants should be given third-party external support on the side, but that doesn't mean that needs to be platformed as entertainment for the world, for a whole of Australia to see. And the biggest concern, which really drove me to starting that, was we're at a time in Australia and honestly the world where domestic family sexual violence is at an all-time high, and it's just getting worse and worse. So by platforming behaviours like that on national television with no, repercussions for their actions, it's sort of normalising that behaviour to just general Australians that you can act that way, but you can still be given a platform on national television and that nothing will happen.
So you mentioned there just before, if someone does show these signs of behaviours that they should be kicked off the show. Can you run us through a few of the things you're asking for in this petition?
So when creating the petition, I didn't want to just do a petition that was sign it and call for MAFS to be over or call for them to just do one or two things. So I spent about 48 hours consulting with professionals in the space, so psychologists, counsellors, sexologists, as well as ex and current MAFS participants to hear what their thoughts were and get their opinions on the demands, but also victim survivors. That's always one of the biggest things for me, is having victim survivors at the forefront. So a whole massive group of people created these demands, and some of them is, the zero tolerance. So if anyone acts abusive in any way, whether that be financial, physical, sexual, they do need to be immediately kicked off the show and not have that platformed on national television. They should be given supports and all the different stuff in the background, but it shouldn't be put on the TV for entertainment. We would like to see a domestic family and sexual violence consultant, someone that's trauma-informed and is a professional, and they should be onboarded to guide the production's decisions. So they need to be there during filming, they need to be there post-show as well, like right now, because you never know how the public is going to take the show as well. As well as that, things like support for the participants throughout the show and after the show. I've spoken to a few participants that did have quite not the best experiences, but actually weren't provided support during. So I think that they should be getting weekly psychology, and it needs to be by a third party, because the issue I've heard is they are offered sort of an in-house psychologist, but all that stuff just gets talked back to the producers. And so the issue with that is that no one is going to be able to trust talking to that professional if it's going to get back to someone. It's little things that people think already happen. It's like the bare minimum, but unfortunately from our conversations with current and ex-participants, it's not the case at all. We all have our television. We've all seen what the show has portrayed and what they've allowed to go on national television. And the biggest fear for me is that particularly young men and boys are going to watch that, and it's normalising that behaviour for them so that they can go and do things like, objectify or make sexual remarks. Like, the abusive behaviour starts by that locker room talk. And I feel like shows portraying physical abuse like this with no repercussions, not being kicked off the show, it normalises rape culture, it normalises abuse, it normalises everything. And as a big national television show, I would say probably one of the biggest in the country, I feel like you have a duty of care to ensure that not only your participants are safe, but also viewers are safe. We've heard from so many victim survivors who watched that and were so triggered. There wasn't adequate trauma-informed trigger warnings. There was like a content warning, but nothing that really went into what would be shown. But also showing stuff like that, it's not only just the prevention, it's like people who are victim survivors watched that and relived what happened to them. When this was filmed last year, this was a time where domestic, family and sexual violence and women being killed by men's violence was at, honestly, a really big time in media. There was media talking about it all the time. There was the rallies that we held. It astounds me that during a time like that, this was still able to be filmed and then go to air. When, MAFS could have done something so amazing with this, which could have been, we're going to give you support in the background, but we're going to kick you off and we're not going to allow that behaviour. They could have turned it into an educational thing for the public, but instead they lost that opportunity and allowed these participants to stay on the show.
Yeah, I want to jump in there because for people like yourself who work in this field, you see this type of behaviour and you can identify it quite easily. You see this all the time, but for a lot of people, they know about the DV rates or they might not. And they might not even acknowledge or know that these behaviours that they're seeing are domestic, family or sexual violence. What responsibility does a show like MAFS have to identify these behaviours as that?
The show is based around relationships. It's based around marriage. And as a show like that, I feel like you have a duty to show healthy relationships and also, show what an unhealthy relationship is. Things like, for example, when there has been unhealthy behaviours, they should have been having the experts step in and actually hold them accountable right then and there. Like, some of the behaviours that we've seen Adrian do, stepping in right then, like have an expert walk in and go, I'm actually going to bring your awareness to this, that you are showing signs of this is unacceptable, and, working through that. For example, another thing is they have Intimacy Week, which is one of the first weeks where they teach the couples about being intimate, and it's like a big part. I remember watching that and I was like, wow, this is exciting, and I know this happens every year, but I was like, surely we'll have some consent education in here, we'll have some healthy relationship education. And there was nothing. It was such a missed point there where we could have had not only the TV show showing Australians watching the show, but also the participants being educated on consent education at a time where it's being spoken about. This isn't 20 years ago where, TV shows would just, and just movies in general would just do unacceptable behaviours. We're at a time where things like this is being called out. It is weird though to me that you have these experts, but the experts aren't doing anything other than the commitment ceremonies and just sort of it's sort of more like they're hosts, but they're not actually stepping in and, calling these behaviours out. And from the start, a lot of people realised that these behaviours, like the punching of the wall, was something that they experienced in the start. For example, myself, when I went through a domestic violence relationship, it didn't start by physical abuse. It started by emotional abuse, name calling. It started by hitting objects, punching walls, things like that. And then once that became, normalized in that relationship and the perpetrator started to realize that they're getting away with that, that's when they when it would go to more physical. So, even on from a victim perspective myself, I have lived that where it started as not punching me, punching something else, but then a month later it's ended up being that. And we know that behaviours like this, being in relationships like this, unfortunately, we had 101 women killed to men's violence last year. And the only good thing I feel like that's come out is that people are now talking about it, and people are calling it out on social media, and they're going to be educating people who probably wouldn't have seen that as abusive or concerning behaviour. And so I am grateful for that. But in the same sense, it's so damaging because it's just normalised it and shown that you can go and do whatever you want and you can still be on Australia's biggest national television show. It's pretty disgusting.
We did speak with an ex-MAFS producer just a few weeks ago when we talked about some of this behaviour shown on TV, and they actually said that it's a reflection of society and that this behaviour is what these people are actually doing, and what you're seeing is real and it's what is happening in Australian homes. Is it good that we're showing this behaviour that's not acceptable, that this is the first time some people might be seeing it?
Yeah, when I look at the premise of the show, and that is being two strangers getting married and falling in love and forming that connection, I don't think they should be actively going out and looking for someone abusive or with abusive patterns to come on to show, because you're literally then putting the participant in harm's way. But if a couple out of all the different 11 or 12 couples was to show behaviours like this, yeah, I do think it is good to show that to the audience, because it's then educating so many people what that's like, and also what it can do as well for victims who are currently in those relationships. If they're watching the show, they'll see that and be like, oh, wait, that's what's happening to me, and maybe that will help them get support or escape or whatnot. The issue is that, we can portray these relationships and whatnot, but we need to be calling it out. We need to be holding it accountable, and that's where it missed the mark. He should have been kicked off the show.
People do also vote with their eyes. What they see is kind of a big thing, and MAFS is, our biggest reality show, like we've said just before. Is the fact that so many people are watching this show suggesting that people want to see this kind of content, even if it's morally wrong? Should that mean the show is cancelled completely, face repercussions, or should it address the behaviour that's going on?
Yeah, so this one's a tricky one, because I know people have different opinions on the repercussions of the show in general, boycotting, etc. My personal opinion is that we should always give something a second chance. And so, yes, MAFS has shown that they haven't done the right thing, but we've now, professionals in the community have created 11 demands. We've done the labour for them. It's now about taking those on to ensure that every season going forward doesn't have what's happened now. They can re-edit the show if they really wanted to. Yes, they're not going to do that, but they could have done little things like not actually include his commitment ceremony on Sunday and put a statement up throughout the episode, or even just a statement on the Instagram calling out the behaviour. There is so much they could have done. But in general, these demands are calling for future seasons, and also towards the end of this season for change to be made. And my thoughts is that let's just say none of this is taken on and we don't see any response by the producers at all. Next season comes on and it's behaviours are still being accepted and normalised. That's when I would, as my advocacy would be boycott this show.
Sarah, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
That was Sarah Williams, the CEO and founder of What You Were Wearing. And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic or family violence, you can call 1-800-RESPECT. That's 1-800-737-732. And if you did want to check out our previous chat with an ex-MAFS producer, you can just search for Confessions of an Ex-MAFS Producer in your feed now. And if you want to sign the petition, we'll also pop that in the show notes. But that's it for this episode of The Briefing. While you're there, though, if you could follow or subscribe to wherever you're listening to this episode of The Briefing in, it really does help us keep pumping out the content that you love. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search for Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.